What I'm going to tell you today is a story about my friend who got into a motorbike accident in Vietnam. So a few years ago, I was in Vietnam, and my language center, we do yearly parties. We had dinner, and then afterwards, we all decided to go karaoke after. Near the end of the karaoke session, one of my friends named Kit wanted to leave early, and I was going to offer to drive her home, but I didn't bring an extra helmet. So at that point, she books her GoJek, I walk her downstairs, and I see her off before she leaves. She gets on her GoJek and she leaves, and I go back and join the karaoke party. And then maybe like 10 minutes later, I get a phone call. I pick up the phone and she's screaming on the phone. She's like, "Oh my God, Victor, I cannot feel my legs." And I was like, what? I was freaking out and I was like, what happened to her, right? And then another man on the phone grabs the phone from her, says in Vietnamese, "Your friend has been in an accident. She's on the street. You need to come now." We're in District 7, and she had gotten into an accident in District 10. As fast as we could, we get to her, and we see her on the sidewalk surrounded by a bunch of Vietnamese men. So the thing about Vietnam is, like, if someone sees an accident, they'll usually try to come and help, even if they're strangers. People in the houses or in the businesses nearby, they'll kind of come out and they'll try to help. So when we got there, we were trying to assess the situation. So what happened was the GoJek driver was driving very fast, and he was trying to avoid a semi-truck. And another motorbike driver was driving next to him, also fast, avoiding the same semi-truck. And as they were avoiding it, their mirrors got hooked to each other and they fell. But my friend flew off the bike, hit the railing, the middle rail of the road, and broke her thigh bone. While the other two were holding onto the bike, so they just fell over and they were bleeding a little bit. But they weren't too badly injured. But my friend got completely injured and her left leg got broken. And so she couldn't stand up. And that's why she said she couldn't feel her legs. I think she was in crazy amount of shock. They kind of carried her into the sidewalk to keep her safe. And as we're trying to assess the situation, one of the men in the group of strangers comes up to me and he goes, "Hey, I think you should pay the GoJek driver, because at the very least, he did drive her, so you should pay for the service." And I was like, pay for the service? Who is going to pay her medical bill? So then I was like, I brushed him off, right? So we didn't get an ambulance. We decided not to call, but we saw a taxi drive by. And then so we waved the taxi over, and then we carried her into the taxi. So we got to the hospital. We carried her onto the hospital bed. We pushed her into the area. And so we're in this big room with a bunch of people in hospital beds, just laying there waiting for a doctor to see them or to get a hospital room. And so they're all injured from an accident or there's the drug overdose, and they're badly injured. Some of them are covered in blood, broken bones, and we're just waiting for her to get a hospital room. So we get there initially, and they bring her in to do some tests. And it was 3 of us, me and 2 other friends that brought her to the hospital. But the 2 other friends had to leave. And so I was with her from 11 p.m. and we did all the tests. And at about 2 or 3, they're like, "Okay, we'll get you a room very soon." And I'm like, wow, it's been like a few hours now. And I was standing next to her for the whole time while we were waiting for her to get a room. And I was like, I'm going to go get some coffee. I'm tired. Right? So I go get some coffee. I come back, drink coffee. And I was like, maybe I should sit down. And as I decided to sit down at the bench, this guy gets wheeled and he's covered in blood. And he had pooped himself because of the accident. He's so badly injured. And the smell of poop is just flying into my nose. And I'm like, okay, I should probably just stand. So I stood up, stood next to my friend, finished my coffee, and I go pee. And then I started thinking to myself, wow, it's been a few hours and she hasn't peed yet. And I was like, oh my God, I wonder if she has to pee. I hope not, because who's going to help her, right? So then I asked her, I'm like, do you need to pee? She goes, no. And then about half an hour later, she's like, hey, Victor, I really need to pee. And I was like, oh, shoot. Okay, let me go talk to a nurse. So I talked to the nurse, and the nurse is like, okay, so you need to go buy a bedpan. And I was like, where? She's like, just go outside, get a bedpan. And I was like, am I helping her pee? She's like, yeah. I was like, huh? This is my coworker. Like, we're pretty close, we're friends, but, we're not like that. We just hung out a few times, and we're pretty close, and we just have fun together. Our relationship is it's a friendship, right? So then I'm like, okay, I'm going to go buy this bedpan. So I step outside, and it's in the middle of the night now. It's like 3 a.m., right? Nobody's outside. It's completely dark. And I'm like, where do I buy this bedpan? Looking outside in front of the hospital, and I see a guy on his motorbike. He's just chilling like this with his feet up on the handlebars. And I'm like, there's just only this guy. So I'm like, hey. He goes, hey. I'm like, are you selling bedpans? And he goes, yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. And he goes, boy or girl? And I'm like, girl. He's like, okay. And he's about to drive off, and I'm like, wait, how much is it? He goes, $30K, which is like, at the time, it was like $1.50. And so he drives off. He comes back with a bedpan. I pay him, and I bring it back in, and I'm like, what do I do now? It's this big, gigantic room surrounded by everyone. And I'm like, is she going to pee here right now? And I'm like, oh. And I ask her, I'm like, hey, do you think you can hold it? And she goes, I'll hold it. I was like, cool. Okay. So then hours go by. Now it's like 5 a.m. They finally call us and they're like, okay, we have a room for you. I was like, fantastic. They pull us out. I wheel her out into a different area of the hospital. We go through a pathway and then we get into another part of the building. And I think we're going to get a room. But no, they put her in the hallway. So they put her in the hallway and she goes, Victor, I really need to pee. And I'm like, that makes sense because you've been holding it the whole night. And I'm like, okay, let's do this. I asked the nurse, and this time the nurse helps, and the nurse situates it. I went to clean the bedpan after, and then they wheel us now to a different room. And I was like, finally, she gets a hospital room. But no, they wheel her into this room. And in the room, I look around, and I'm like, dude, this is like a locker room. This is like where the nurses put their stuff when they first check into work. It's just a room full of lockers. And the doctor walks in, and he's like, hello. And he's like, are you the husband? And I'm like, no, I'm just the coworker. I'm the friend. And he goes, okay, well, this is what's going to happen. We're going to drill her leg, and we're going to tie it, and we're going to hang it up. And I was like, what? He's like, we need to hang it up so we can straighten it out because the bones now are crossing each other like this. We want to straighten it out so they could be, a little more aligned. And I was like, okay. And then Kit goes to me, she goes, Victor, what's going to happen? And I'm like, I think you just might want to close your eyes. And at that point, I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I'm in shock looking at all these people who have been injured. And I'm like, this is really going to happen. And then he goes to me, he goes, here, hold her leg. I was like, me? He goes, yeah. I was like, you don't want to get a nurse or something? He goes, no, you can hold it. I was like, me? And then so I'm holding her ankle, and then I tell her to close her eyes. And what he does is he gets the needle. He sticks the needle in on both sides. It's supposed to be like a painkiller or something like that. But he went, boop, boop, and he went, zzz, and he drilled right through it 2 seconds later. And she is screaming at the top of her lungs. And I was like, dude, were you not going to wait for the painkiller to kind of set in? No, there was no wait. There was no time between. He went, boop, boop, and zoom, right through her leg. And I was like, oh my God. So then after he did that, he left the metal piece in there and he tied a string on both sides and he dangled it off the bed so it could pull her leg up. And looking back, we realized that he probably could have just, tied a harness under her calf and lifted up her leg without drilling into her leg. But we did the best that we could. And he was a doctor. So I was like, why wouldn't I trust a doctor? Throughout that night, I kind of pretty much acted as the translator, and I was just there for emotional support. And it was very traumatic for the both of us, definitely for her. And it actually made her kind of really not like Vietnam after that. She left to go back to the Philippines. And it showed me that the medical system in Vietnam was definitely lacking. And it was something that we should really be careful of when we go to Vietnam. And this accident could have easily been avoided if that Grab driver was not driving so fast. And so, in the end, she was able to get surgery. And she was okay. She went back to the Philippines and she got surgery again. Because apparently they said like the metal in her leg was infected. It was rusted or something like that. And I don't know if it was a Vietnam issue. And I don't know if the Philippines were just saying that. The Filipino doctor. I don't know who's to blame. But she's okay now. She's walking again. She's normal. But it was a very traumatic event for her. Taking a Grab bike or a GoJek in Vietnam is a bad thing. But there are guys who drive really fast. So you should be mindful of that. But this story kind of acts as a warning for you when you go to Vietnam. It's something that you should take precaution and you should be very careful when you hop on motorbikes with other people. If you are too afraid, I would recommend taking a taxi. But the experience in Vietnam is really nice when you're on a motorbike. But there are people who drive very recklessly in Vietnam. So you should stay vigilant and stay careful. You can't 100% avoid these situations. but you can be safe and remind the Grab driver to slow down, the GoJek driver to slow down. I would recommend taking Grab because I feel like they're more reputable. They do more extensive checks on their drivers, but you can never be 100% sure that you're going to be okay. So this story is not to deter you from visiting Vietnam. It's just something that is a reality. A lot of people on YouTube will tell you when you cross the street, you shouldn't be concerned because they'll magically avoid you. I think when you're crossing the street, please take a look at where you're walking. Please be careful. It's not as simple as you think. These drivers sometimes are not paying attention to you and they're really driving recklessly at times. You should always stay careful. And if you need to tell a driver to slow down, you can say, Anh ơi, chạy chậm lại. These guys sometimes do not care. They get rewarded based on the number of rides that they do throughout the day. So they have a quota. And that's one of the reasons why I think that they're driving so fast. They're trying to get you to your destination so they can get the next ride, so they can get the certain amount of points, so that they can get a bonus. So I think you should stay vigilant, stay safe, but I don't think you should be scared of Vietnam. I hope you liked the video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. And I'll tell you more stories about Vietnam. Not all of them are horror stories. A lot of them are fun, but I do have a few horror stories that I want to share. So if you want to join me for the next one, don't forget to hit subscribe, hit that bell for a notification, and you'll get notified when I post the next video. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time. Peace.